It's past midnight in San Jose, California. Rain drums against 10,000 windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a hammer strikes wood, still building, always building, even now, even after all these years. You walk toward the sound, but the hallway takes you nowhere. A door opens onto a wall. Stairs climb toward the ceiling and stop. Another door. This one drops 8 feet straight down to the garden below. You're lost in a house that seems designed to lose you. This is the Winchester Mystery House. And tonight we're going to talk about what really happened here. Not the ghost story you've heard, but something stranger, sadder, and far more human than any curse. If you're drawn to places where history, architecture, and the weight of grief collide, where vast American fortunes built monuments to things we can barely name, then subscribe now. Hit the bell. Leave a comment about which Gilded Age mansion we should investigate next. Because this channel goes deep into the houses that haunt our national memory, and the Winchester House might be the most misunderstood of them all. Let's begin with a woman of fortune and a question America still can't answer. Was Sarah Winchester mad? Or was she the sanest person in a world gone mad with money and death? Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, a world of Yale scholarship, strict Protestant upbringing, and quiet, educated refinement. She was fluent in 4 languages. She played piano beautifully. She stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed less than 100 pounds for most of her life. In 1862, she married William Wirt Winchester, the only son of Oliver Winchester, founder of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. You know the name, the Winchester rifle, the gun that won the West. Lever action, 15 rounds, used by cowboys, soldiers, settlers, and anyone pushing across the frontier. It was also used to kill thousands upon thousands of Native Americans, Mexican soldiers, outlaws, lawmen, animals, and civilians fell to Winchester bullets. The company made a fortune selling efficient death. Sarah's life, for a few years, seemed blessed. In 1866, she gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester. But 6 weeks later, the baby died of marasmus, a wasting disease, probably malnutrition or infection. Sarah never had another child. She sank into deep, unshakable grief. 15 years later, in 1881, her husband William died of tuberculosis. He was 43. Sarah was 42, childless, and now the inheritor of one of the largest fortunes in America. Roughly $20 million in assets, plus a 50% stake in the Winchester Company that paid her about $1,000 a day, every single day, for the rest of her life. In today's money, that's $500 million, with an income of nearly $15 million a year. She was one of the richest women in the world, and she was completely, devastatingly alone. This is where the legend begins. And like most legends, it's built on a single unverifiable story that only appeared after Sarah's death. According to the tale, Sarah, crushed by grief and guilt, visited a Boston medium. The medium told her that her family was cursed. The spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles were haunting her, demanding vengeance. Her baby, her husband. These deaths were only the beginning. Unless she did exactly as the spirits commanded, she too would die. The medium's instructions were strange and specific. Leave New Haven, go west, buy a house, and build. Build continuously, day and night, room after room, forever. As long as construction never stopped, the spirits would be confused, trapped in the maze, unable to find her. But if the hammers ever went silent, if she ever stopped building, she would die that very night. It's a perfect ghost story. Grief, guilt, a fortune built on blood, and a woman driven mad by voices only she could hear. Newspapers loved it. Tour guides still tell it. Movies have been made about it. There's only one problem. There's no evidence Sarah ever visited that medium. No record of the seance. No contemporary source mentions the curse until after her death in 1922, when the house was being marketed as a tourist attraction. The story first appears in writing in the 1920s, told by people selling tickets. But something did happen. Because in 1884, Sarah Winchester left Connecticut, traveled alone across the country, and bought an unfinished 8-room farmhouse on 44 acres of apricot and prune orchards in San Jose, California. And then, for the next 38 years, she built, and built, and built. She never stopped. Let's be clear about what building meant. This wasn't a renovation. It wasn't even a mansion project with an architect, a plan, and a completion date. This was something else entirely, continuous, obsessive, improvisational construction that went on every single day, including Sundays, holidays, and through the night, for 38 years. Sarah hired a team of around 20 to 30 carpenters, builders, and craftsmen. She met with the foreman every morning in her daisy room. Sometimes she brought sketches on paper or tablecloths. Sometimes she simply pointed and said, "Build a room here." No formal blueprints. No unified design. Just endless addition, revision, demolition, and reconstruction. At its peak, the house had about 160 rooms, though the number kept changing because Sarah would close off sections, tear down walls, add new staircases, or seal entire wings. There were roughly 40 staircases, 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 17 chimneys, and 6 kitchens. The house sprawled across 6 acres of land, rising 7 stories at its tallest, a chaotic labyrinth of Queen and Victorian Gothic, and whatever else Sarah wanted that week. And yes, it was strange. Stairs that climb to the ceiling and stop. Doors that open onto solid walls. Doors that open onto 8-foot drops into the garden below. Windows built into floors. Chimneys that rise partway and never reach the roof. Secret passageways behind panels. Cabinets barely an inch deep. A staircase with steps only 2 inches high, winding up 44 times across 9 feet. Some windows look directly into other windows across narrow shafts. Some hallways wind back on themselves. There are rooms within rooms, closets leading to other closets, and at least one door installed upside down. Newspapers called it madness. Spiritualists called it spirit architecture. Tourists today call it haunted. But here's what nobody tells you. Much of it made sense. Sarah Winchester suffered from severe arthritis. Those shallow stairs? Easier to climb when your joints hurt. The winding halls and multiple doors? She could move through her house without navigating steep steps or long distances. The excessive windows? The California sun flooded her rooms with natural light, which she loved. Many of the doors to nowhere were simply old doors left over when walls got moved. Standard in any home renovated over decades without tearing everything down first. The truth is, if you walked through the house in 1900 and asked Sarah why a door was there, she probably would have said, "Oh, we moved that wall last year and didn't bother removing the frame." But she didn't explain. She rarely spoke to outsiders at all. She was deeply private, almost reclusive. And so the myths grew in the silence. Let's talk about the seance room. Its small plane located in the center of the house. One entrance from her bedroom, but multiple hidden exits through cabinets and panels that lead into other rooms or down secret staircases. There are 13 hooks on one wall. 13 co-pegs. The number 13 appears throughout the house. 13 steps on some stairs. 13 windows in some walls. 13 panels in certain ceilings. The tour guides say Sarah held seances here every night, communing with spirits, receiving orders on where to build next. They say she wore a veil and rang a bell at midnight and again at 2 a.m. to summon and dismiss the dead. But here's the problem. The only people who reported these seances were either servants who spoke decades later, with inconsistent stories, or journalists who never set foot in the house while Sarah was alive. No contemporuri da ieri. No letters. No photographs of seances. Nothing. What we do know is that Sarah's bedroom was directly connected to that room, and that she moved through her house at night often because of insomnia and pain. The multiple exits? Common in wealthy Victorian homes as fire escapes and servant passages. The 13 hooks? Possibly a design choice, or maybe just where the carpenter stopped. The bell? She had a bell system throughout the house to summon servants. Rich people in 1900 all had them. So was there a seance room? Maybe. Was it the center of a nightly ritual with ghosts? We have no proof. But it makes a better story than Sarah had insomnia and liked clever carpentry. On April 18, 1906, at 5:12 a.m., the San Francisco earthquake hit. It was one of the most powerful quakes in American history. San Francisco burned for days. Across the Bay Area, buildings collapsed. And in San Jose, the Winchester House, already a fragile, towering, top-heavy maze, was devastated. The 7-story front section crumbled. The tall observation tower collapsed. Chimneys fell. Walls cracked. Ceilings caved in. Sarah herself was briefly trapped in a bedroom when a door jammed shut from the shaking. Servants had to pry her out through a window. She was 66 years old. Her house, her life's work, was in ruins. So what did she do? She didn't rebuild the tower. She didn't repair the front section. Instead, she ordered those 30 rooms sealed off entirely, boarded up, left as wreckage, never entered again. And then she turned her attention to the back of the house and kept building. Some say she believed the earthquake was punishment from the spirits for building too high, for trying to escape toward heaven. Others say she was just practical. Why waste money repairing rooms she didn't need when she could build new ones? We don't know. She never said. But the hammers started again the very next day. And they didn't stop for 16 more years. Here's what nobody talks about when they call Sarah Winchester mad. How she treated the people who worked for her. At a time when industrial workers were fighting for basic rights, when factories paid starvation wages, when strikes were broken with bullets, when immigrants were worked to death in tenements, Sarah Winchester employed about 20 to 30 men continuously through recessions, depressions, and disasters, and she paid them well. Her workers made more than the going rate for carpenters in California. She paid them every week, on time, in cash. When men got injured on the job and construction injuries were common, she covered their medical bills. She gave paid leave. She gave pensions. She kept some men employed for over 30 years, long after they were too old to swing a hammer, paying them to do light work or just to be there. During the Panic of 1893, one of the worst economic depressions in U.S. history, unemployment hit 20%. Factories shut down. Men starved. But in San Jose, Sarah Winchester's crew kept building. She never laid anyone off. She never cut wages. She kept the hammers going, and the men kept food on their tables. She also donated, heavily, to hospitals, orphanages, disaster relief funds. After the 1906 earthquake, she gave thousands of dollars to rebuild San Jose's infrastructure. She funded a tuberculosis hospital, the disease that killed her husband. She gave anonymously, often and generously. Her estate records, examined after her death, show steady, organized philanthropy. Not the chaotic spending of a madwoman, but the deliberate budgeting of someone who understood money and chose to use it for others. So why did the newspapers call her crazy? Because she was a woman. Because she was rich. Because she was reclusive. And because she was doing something no one could understand. Think about it. In the Gilded Age, wealthy men built mansions to show off. Cornelius Vanderbilt built Biltmore to prove he was richer than God. Andrew Carnegie built libraries to be remembered as a saint. J.P. Morgan collected art to prove he had taste. Every powerful man built something to tell the world who he was. But Sarah, she built for no audience. She never threw parties. She never gave interviews. She never opened her house to society photographers or journalists. She just built. And when you're a woman and you're rich, and you don't perform wealth the way society expects, when you don't marry again, don't host, don't smile, don't explain, then you must be mad. That's the only story that makes sense to people who can't imagine a woman with power and no need for approval. The San Jose newspapers called her the woman who was always building. They mocked her. They called the house a mystery because she wouldn't let them in. They said she was crazy, haunted, pathetic. But she didn't care. She kept building. Let's talk about what the house actually was. Not a haunted mansion. Not a seance cathedral. But a project. Sarah Winchester was a woman with an immense fortune, no family, no social obligations, and 38 years to fill. She couldn't have more children. She couldn't bring her husband back. She couldn't undo the violence her family's rifles had caused. So she took the money those rifles made, the blood money, if you want to call it that, and she turned it into something else. She created jobs. Steady, reliable, well-paid jobs in an era of ruthless exploitation. She kept men employed through economic collapse. She paid medical bills. She funded pensions. She gave to hospitals and orphans. And yes, she built a weird, sprawling, beautiful, baffling house that gave her something to do every single day. Was she grieving? Yes. Was she lonely? Almost certainly. Was she trying to make sense of a fortune built on death? Maybe. Was she trying to atone? We can't know. But she spent decades turning money into labor, labor into rooms, and rooms into what? A home? A monument? A puzzle? A fortress against silence? Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. But it wasn't madness. It was purpose. And for a woman in 1900 with no script, no role, and no expectations she cared to meet, purpose was revolution. Here's the other thing. The house was beautiful. Yes, it was strange. But it was also full of Tiffany stained glass hand-carved woodwork, parquet floors inlaid with mahogany, antique, imported marble, art glass windows featuring spiderwebs and flowers and intricate geometric designs. She loved beauty. She loved craftsmanship. She loved light. There's a window in the grand ballroom, a stunning piece of stained glass with spiderwebs and flowers that she reportedly adored. But the window faces a wall. Sunlight can't come through. So Sarah had workers install a second wall with windows facing outside, specifically so light could pass through both walls and illuminate her favorite glass. That's not madness. That's obsession with beauty. That's someone who wanted to live inside art. She also loved technology. The house had indoor plumbing, gas lighting, and later electricity. She had 3 elevators installed, rare in private homes at the time. She had push-button gas lights that could be turned on from multiple locations. She had modern heating. The house was advanced. And yet the legend ignores all of this. The legend wants a crazy widow in a haunted house. It doesn't want a brilliant, stubborn, grieving woman who spent 40 years doing whatever the hell she wanted with her own money. So let's ask the hard question. Why did she build? We don't know. She left no diary, no memoir, no letters explaining herself. Every theory is speculation. Maybe she was told to buy a medium. Maybe she believed in spirits. Maybe she was just superstitious, like many people in the spiritualist era. Maybe she was atoning, trying to balance the deaths caused by Winchester rifles with life, labor, creation. Maybe she was grieving and building was therapy. Maybe the hammering drowned out the silence. Maybe the endless project gave her a reason to wake up. Maybe she just liked building. Maybe she was an amateur architect with unlimited money and time, experimenting with design. Maybe she was afraid of death and believed, superstitiously or half-seriously, that as long as she kept moving, kept creating, kept the house alive, she wouldn't die. Or maybe she was just bored. Maybe she thought, I'm rich, I'm alone, I'll do what I want. And what she wanted was to build the strangest, most personal house in America. All of these could be true. None of them make her mad. Let's go back to the curse. Because even if the story is false, the feeling behind it isn't. Sarah Winchester was haunted. Maybe not by literal ghosts, but by something real. The weight of where her money came from. Her fortune came from the Winchester repeating rifle, a weapon that killed thousands. Native Americans gunned down during westward expansion. Mexican soldiers in wars over stolen land. Settlers and outlaws killing each other in range wars. The rifle was efficient, cheap, and everywhere. It made the American frontier possible. And the American frontier was built on violence. Sarah didn't pull the trigger. She didn't design the rifle, but she inherited the profits. And if you're someone with a conscience, with education, with awareness, someone who lost a child and a husband and had 40 years alone to think, how do you live with that? You can't give the money back. The people are already dead. You can't undo history. So what do? Maybe you build. Maybe you try to turn death money into something else. You employ men who'd otherwise be unemployed. You pay well. You give to hospitals and orphans. You fund the living. You create something that wasn't there before, something strange and excessive and beautiful and confusing, but undeniably alive. Maybe that's not atonement. Maybe it's just trying to do something other than sit in a mansion and count your blood money. Trying to turn inheritance into action. Trying to keep your hands busy so you don't think about the ghosts, real or imagined, that won't leave you alone. If that's madness, then maybe we need more madness in the world. But America didn't see it that way. America saw a rich, reclusive widow building a crazy house, and it turned her into a joke. The newspapers loved her because she was easy to mock. She didn't fight back. She didn't give interviews. She didn't defend herself. So they wrote whatever sold papers. The haunted widow, the ghost-obsessed heiress, the woman building a maze to trap the dead. And people believed it. Because it's easier to believe in a curse than to believe a woman might have her own reasons. Reasons she doesn't owe you. Reasons she'll never explain. When Sarah went into town, she wore heavy veils. Not because of spirits, but because she valued privacy and didn't want to be recognized. The newspapers called it hiding from the ghosts. When she traveled, and she did travel often to Europe and across the U.S., she used different names and stayed in modest hotels. The papers called it paranoia. But maybe she just wanted to move through the world without being Sarah Winchester, the mystery widow. Maybe she wanted to be anonymous. She had a right to that. But she never got it. Here's what Sarah's daily life actually looked like, based on staff accounts and estate records. She woke early. She dressed simply, high-necked black dresses, morning clothes she wore for 40 years. She had breakfast alone. Then she met with her foreman, John Hanson, in the Daisy Room. She'd give him instructions for the day's work. Build here, tear down there, move that wall, add a window. Then she'd go about her business. She played piano, beautifully by all accounts. She read voraciously in multiple languages. She managed her fortune carefully, reviewing accounts and investments. She answered letters from charities. She planned her orchards and gardens. In the afternoons, she sometimes toured the construction. She'd inspect the work, suggest changes, request adjustments. She had opinions. She knew what she wanted. She wasn't confused or helpless. In the evenings, she had dinner alone. She rarely had guests. Occasionally, her niece visited or a secretary. But Sarah preferred solitude. After dinner, she might play piano again, or read, or walk her gardens. She loved flowers, especially daisies and roses. At night, she often couldn't sleep. Arthritis pain kept her awake. So she'd move through the house, her endless creation, room to room, hall to hall, checking on things, thinking, being. This was her life. Quiet, controlled, solitary, purposeful, and deeply, deeply private. Does that sound like madness? Or does it sound like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even if no one else understood? Here's the other thing people forget. Sarah was competent. She managed a massive fortune for 40 years without losing it. She invested wisely. She ran her household, her staff, her construction projects. She handled legal matters, property taxes, business correspondence. She traveled internationally, navigated contracts, dealt with architects and suppliers. After her death, when her estate was inventoried, there was no chaos. No secret hoarding, no financial ruin, no evidence of dementia or delusion. Everything was organized. Her will was clear. Her assets were accounted for. Her charitable donations were documented. She knew what she was doing, right up until the end. And yet the legend persists. The mad widow, the haunted heiress, the woman building a maze because ghosts told her to. Why? Because the truth is less dramatic. The truth is a wealthy, educated, grieving woman who spent 40 years doing exactly what she wanted, answering to no one, and refusing to explain herself to a world that demanded she perform femininity, sociability, and sanity on its terms. She said no. She built her house. She paid her workers. She lived her life. And for that, history called her crazy. Let's talk about the 13 obsession, because it's part of the legend. 13 windows in some rooms. 13 steps on some stairs. 13 hooks in the seance room. 13 bathrooms. depending on how you count. The number 13 appears throughout the house, and tour guides say Sarah was obsessed with it, either because of superstition or because spirits commanded it. But here's the thing, 13 also doesn't appear in lots of places. There are staircases with 7 steps, 15 steps, 44 steps. There are rooms with 8 windows, 12 windows, 20 windows. The house has 40 fireplaces, not 13. It has 17 chimneys, not 13. If you look for 13ths, you'll find them. If you look for other patterns, you'll find those too. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We see what we're looking for. Was Sarah superstitious about 13? Maybe. Lots of people were in the 19th century. Was she obsessed with it? The evidence is thin. The legend is thick. But again, the legend sells tickets. September 5th, 1922. Sarah Winchester died in her sleep at the age of 83. She had been ill for some time, heart trouble, complications from old age. But she didn't die suddenly, and she didn't die dramatically. She simply went to bed one night and didn't wake up. The construction stopped the next day. After 38 years of continuous building, the hammers finally went silent. The carpenters packed their tools and went home. And immediately, the mystery began. When her estate was settled, her niece, Frances Marriott, inherited the house and most of the fortune. Frances had no interest in continuing the construction. She ordered the house inventoried, appraised, and prepared for sale. What they found inside was astonishing. Rooms full of stored furniture, chairs, tables, wardrobes, beds, enough to fill dozens of homes, much of it still wrapped and never used. Warehouses of building materials, lumber, tiles, bricks, glass, nails, pipes, tools, hardware. Enough to build several more houses. Closets filled with expensive clothing, most of it never worn. Art glass windows, still crated. Thousands of keys. But no diary, no letters, no written explanation of why she built the house or what she was trying to do. No memoir, no confession, no architectural plans. Sarah left behind a fortune, a house, and silence. The estate hired movers to clear out the house. It took 6 weeks and 8 moving trucks working nonstop. They carted away furniture, rugs, paintings, glass, hardware. They sold what they could at auction. They trashed the rest. And in the process, they stripped the house. They removed most of the furnishings, the decorations, the personal touches that made it Sarah's home. They turned it into an empty shell, a maze without context, a puzzle without answers. And then they opened it to the public. In 1923, barely a year after Sarah's death, the Winchester Mystery House opened as a tourist attraction. The marketing was immediate and shameless. Come see the house the ghost built. The mystery mansion of the haunted heiress. A labyrinth of terror and wonder. They leaned hard into the curse story. They invented details. They gave tours focused on the spirit room, the stairs to nowhere, the doors that open onto walls. They told visitors that Sarah held seances every midnight. They said she wore a veil and talked to the dead. They said she built to confuse the spirits. None of this was confirmed. Most of it was speculation. Some of it was outright fiction. But it worked. People came. Thousands of them. They wanted to see the crazy widow's haunted house. They wanted the thrill, the mystery, the ghost story. And the house, Sarah's strange, private, beautiful creation, became a sideshow. Let's be clear, some of the staff accounts were probably true. Sarah's servants did report that she moved through the house at night. They did say she rang bells at midnight and 2 a.m., though that was likely just her signaling for help with pain or insomnia. They did say she had a room she used privately, and that she was interested in spiritualism, which was mainstream in her era. But the way these stories were told after her death transformed them. What might have been Mrs. Winchester had trouble sleeping and rang for the night became Mrs. Winchester summoned spirits in a midnight ritual. What might have been she liked to check on construction progress at odd hours became she wandered the halls, fleeing from ghosts. Context was stripped. Nuance was erased. And Sarah, who couldn't defend herself anymore, became whatever story sold best. Here's the painful part. We'll never know the truth. We don't know if Sarah believed in spirits. We don't know if she thought she was cursed. We don't know if the building was therapy, atonement, obsession, or just a project to fill the years. We know she was kind to her workers. We know she was generous. We know she was private, stubborn, and unconventional. We know she built something no one had ever built before. But we don't know why. And maybe that's the real mystery. Not the staircases to nowhere or the doors that open onto walls. Not the number 13 or the seance room. But the simple human question. What was she thinking? What did it feel like to be Sarah Winchester? To lose your child, your husband, and then inherit a fortune built on violence? To be alone, wealthy, and expected to remarry or disappear? To have 40 years stretching ahead of you with no script, no role, and no one who could understand? What did it feel like to decide, I'm going to build a house, and I'm never going to stop? Was it defiance? Was it despair? Was it hope? Was it madness or the sanest thing she could think to do? We don't know. And because we don't know, we fill the silence with ghosts. The house itself is still there, of course. Still standing in San Jose, though the city has grown up around it. Still a California historical landmark. Still a tourist destination. But it's changed. After the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, parts of it were damaged again and had to be reinforced. Restoration is ongoing. Some rooms have been refurnished based on photographs and estate records, trying to recreate what it looked like when Sarah lived there. But much of it is still empty, still strange, still a maze. And the tours still focus on the ghosts. They still tell the curse story. They still market it as a haunted house. Because that's what people want. That's what sells tickets. There are ghost tours at night. Paranormal investigators bring equipment and record EVPs. People claim to see spirits in the halls, hear footsteps, feel cold spots. The Winchester Mystery House is regularly listed as one of the most haunted places in America. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just an old house with a sad story. And we've projected our need for ghosts onto it because we can't accept that a woman might have built it for her own reasons and never told us what they were. Here's what I think. Sarah Winchester wasn't mad. She was grieving. She was alone. She was carrying the weight of a fortune she didn't ask for, built on violence she didn't commit but couldn't ignore. And she built. She built because it gave her something to do. She built because it employed people. She built because it was beautiful. She built because she could. She built because no one could stop her. And yes, maybe she built because she was trying to outrun death. Maybe she believed, half seriously, half superstitiously, that as long as she kept building, she'd keep living. If so, it worked. She lived to 83 in an era when average life expectancy was 50. She outlived her grief by 40 years. She created something no one else could have imagined. And then, she died, and the hammer stopped, and the world turned her into a ghost story. Let's talk about what the house represents now. Because the Winchester Mystery House isn't just a building. It's a symbol. And what it symbolizes depends entirely on who's looking. For ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts, it's proof of the supernatural. A place where the boundary between the living and dead breaks down. Where spirits linger because they were invited, summoned, or trapped. For tourists, it's a fun oddity. A weird roadside attraction. A maze to get lost in. A place to take selfies with doors that go nowhere. For historians, it's a monument to Gilded Age excess and eccentricity, a time when American fortunes were so vast that people could build whatever they wanted, however strange, with no oversight or limits. For feminists, it's a story of a woman who refused the roles offered to her, who didn't remarry, didn't retreat into quiet widowhood, didn't apologize for taking up space and doing something inexplicable. For architects, it's a nightmare and a marvel, a structure with no plan, no logic, and yet somehow still standing after more than a century, earthquakes included. For people interested in grief and trauma, it's a monument to what loss does to us, how it can bend our lives into shapes no one recognizes, how it can turn us inward, how it can make us build walls, literal or otherwise. All of these are true. None of them are complete. But here's the one that interests me most. The Winchester House as a monument to questions America doesn't want to answer. Because at the center of this story is a simple, ugly fact. Sarah Winchester's fortune came from guns, from a weapon that killed people, that enabled conquest, expansion, genocide, violence. The Winchester rifle was part of the machinery of American empire, the tool that cleared the frontier, removed the indigenous people, enforced the hierarchy of who got to live where and on whose terms. And Sarah inherited that. She didn't choose it. She didn't celebrate it. But she had it. And she spent 40 years doing something with it. She could have lived quietly in New Haven, donated to churches, and died respectable. She could have remarried and let her new husband manage the money. She could have spent it on jewels, parties, European tours, and social status. That's what Gilded Age wealth was for, to be seen, displayed, consumed. Instead, she went west, toward the frontier her family's rifles had won, and built a house that made no sense to anyone. A house that employed working men. A house that gave jobs during depressions. A house that kept hammers ringing when factories were silent. Was she trying to atone? Was she trying to transform blood money into labor, creation, life? Or was she just doing what she could with what she had? We don't know. But the fact that we turned her into a ghost story instead of asking those questions, that tells you something about America. We'd rather believe in haunted houses than confront the violence our fortunes are built on. Here's the thing about ghosts. They're easier than history. If the house is haunted, then it's supernatural. It's about spirits and curses and things beyond our control. It's entertainment. It's a thrill. It's a story we can tell without guilt. But if the house isn't haunted, if it's just a building that a grieving woman built with money made from guns that killed thousands of people, then we have to ask harder questions. Questions like, what do you do with wealth built on violence? Questions like, can you atone for harm you didn't commit but still benefited from? Questions like, what does it mean to inherit a fortune built on stolen land, broken treaties, and dead bodies? These aren't abstract questions. These are American questions. They're questions about every railroad fortune, every oil fortune, every tech fortune, every inheritance that carries the weight of who was exploited, displaced, or destroyed to make it possible. Sarah Winchester lived with those questions every day. And maybe, just maybe, the house was her answer, or her attempt at an answer, or her admission that there is no answer, but you still have to do something. Maybe that's why we'd rather believe in ghosts. Let's talk about the workers one more time, because they're the ones we keep forgetting. We talk about Sarah. We talk about the house. We talk about the ghosts, the curse, the mystery. But we almost never talk about the men who built it. 20 to 30 men, working 6 days a week, sometimes 7, for 38 years. Carpenters, masons, plumbers, glaziers, craftsmen. Many of them immigrants. Many of them working class, scraping by, sending money home to families. And Sarah paid them well. She paid them on time. She kept them employed when other men were starving. She covered their medical bills and gave them pensions. That matters. That's not nothing. In an era when workers were disposable, when men died in factories and mines and nobody cared, when unions were crushed and strikes were massacred, Sarah Winchester kept men employed, paid, and cared for. Does that absolve the source of the money? No. Does it erase the violence of the Winchester rifle? No. But it's also not irrelevant. Sarah didn't choose where her money came from, but she did choose what to do with it. And part of what she did was create stable, dignified work for men who otherwise wouldn't have had it. That's not the stuff of ghost stories. That's just decency. Quiet, unglamorous decency. And maybe that's why the legend ignores it. Here's the question I keep coming back to. Who gets to be eccentric, and who gets called crazy? If a man builds a strange house, we call him a visionary. We call him eccentric, brilliant, ahead of his time. Think of Frank Lloyd Wright and his falling water, jutting out over a waterfall with cantilevered terraces. Think of Hearst Castle, with its mismatched towers and hoarded art. Think of any number of male architects and collectors who built bizarre, personal monuments and are now celebrated as geniuses. But when a woman does it, especially a woman who's alone, who's rich, who doesn't explain herself, we call her mad. We say she's haunted. We say she's a tragic figure, a victim, a cautionary tale. Why? Because women aren't supposed to be inexplicable. Women are supposed to be knowable, readable, understandable. We're supposed to perform our emotions correctly, grieve correctly, spend money correctly, behave correctly. Sarah didn't. She built her own world and shut everyone out. She didn't ask permission. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. And so the world turned her into a ghost story. Because if she's crazy, if she's cursed, if she's haunted, then her behavior makes sense. Then we can understand her. Then we can contain her. But if she was just a woman doing what she wanted with her own money and her own time, answering to no one, that's dangerous. That's uncontrollable. That can't be allowed to stand. So we haunt her. We turn her into a mystery, a legend, a ghost herself. And maybe that's the real curse of the Winchester house. Let's go inside the house one more time. Let's walk through it, not as a tourist, not chasing ghosts, but trying to see it as Sarah might have. You enter through a side door. There's no real front door anymore. The earthquake destroyed the original entrance, and Sarah never rebuilt it. The hallway is narrow, winding. The floor is inlaid parquet, beautiful craftsmanship. Light comes from small windows, set at odd angles. You turn a corner, and there's a staircase. You climb. The steps are shallow, only 2 inches high, 44 of them rising 9 feet. If you have arthritis, this is perfect. You can take your time. You don't have to strain. At the top, a door. You open it. Another hallway. More windows, dozens of them, flooding the space with California sunlight. You can see through the house in strange ways. Windows layered behind windows, light passing through multiple rooms. You open another door. It's a linen closet. But behind the linens, there's a panel. You push it. It swings open. A secret passage. Why? Maybe Sarah liked the idea of moving unseen. Maybe she liked privacy. Maybe she just thought it was clever. You find the grand ballroom. It's enormous, but Sarah never held a ball. She built it anyway. The floor is polished. The walls are paneled. There are stained glass windows, beautiful, intricate, expensive. One of them faces a wall, but she had the wall fitted with windows behind it, so light could still shine through. This wasn't madness. This was love of beauty. This was someone who wanted to live surrounded by art, even if no one else would ever see it. You keep walking. You find staircases that lead nowhere. They rise to the ceiling and stop. But look closer. These aren't random. They're remnants. Sarah changed her mind, moved a wall, closed off a section. She didn't tear out the stairs because why bother? She liked stairs. Maybe she liked the look of them. Maybe she liked the reminder of how the house had evolved. You find doors that open onto walls. But again, these are fossils. The house is a living record of its own construction. Every dead-end door, every blocked window, every sealed hallway is a moment in time. A choice made, then revised. This is what happens when you build for 40 years with no final plan. The house becomes a palimpsest. Layers of decisions written over each other, none of them erased. You find the Daisy Room, where Sarah met with her foreman every morning. It's small, plain. The wallpaper has daisies. She loved daisies. They reminded her of her daughter, Annie, who died at 6 weeks old. 40 years later, she still surrounded herself with daisies. Is that madness? Or is that just grief that never ends? You find the kitchens. There are 6 of them scattered through the house. Why so many? Maybe because Sarah kept changing where she wanted to eat. Maybe because she liked the idea of options. Maybe because she kept building and kept needing kitchens in new sections. You find the seance room. It's small, plain. One entrance from her bedroom, but multiple exits through hidden panels and staircases. The 13 hooks on the wall. You stand there and try to imagine. Did Sarah sit here at midnight, alone, calling to the dead? Did she wear a veil and ring a bell and ask spirits where to build next? Or did she just sit here in the quiet, in the one room with multiple exits, multiple escapes, and think about her life, her choices, her losses? Did she sit here because it was the center of her maze, the heart of her creation, the one place where she could be truly alone? We don't know. We'll never know. The room doesn't answer. You find her bedroom. It's modest. Smaller than you'd expect. The bed is narrow. The furniture is simple. There's a small desk. This is where she slept when she could sleep. This is where she woke every morning for 38 years and decided to keep building. This is where she died quietly at 83 in her sleep. There's a photograph of her taken late in life. She's tiny, frail, dressed in black. Her face is serious, lying tired. She doesn't smile. She looks directly at the camera. What is she thinking? Is she satisfied with what she's built? Is she lonely? Is she at peace? Is she still haunted by ghosts, by guilt, by grief, by the 40 years of silence she's carried? The photograph doesn't tell you. Sarah doesn't tell you. She never told anyone. You walk back through the house. You get lost. Of course you do. The hallways twist. The doors mislead. You go up a staircase and find yourself on the same floor. You open a door and it's a closet. You open another and it's a drop to the garden below. But here's the thing. If you lived here, you'd know the way. Sarah knew. She moved through this house every day, every night. She knew which doors led where, which stairs went up, which passages were shortcuts. To her, this wasn't a maze. This was home. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the house is only a mystery to us because we're outsiders. Maybe to Sarah, it made perfect sense. Maybe every staircase, every window, every revision had a reason, practical, aesthetic, emotional. Maybe we're the ones who are lost, not her. Let's talk about what happened after Sarah died. Not just to the house, but to her legacy. Her fortune was divided. Her niece inherited most of it. Some went to charities. The house itself was sold, eventually, to a group of investors who turned it into a tourist attraction. And almost immediately, the sanitizing began. The investors didn't want a story about a wealthy widow who employed workers and built a weird house for personal reasons. They wanted a ghost story. They wanted mystery, hauntings, curses. They wanted something they could sell. So they emphasized the seance room. They invented details about midnight rituals. They played up the stairs to nowhere as evidence of spirit commands. They brought in mediums and psychics to commune with Sarah's ghost. They marketed the house as haunted. And it worked. The Winchester Mystery House became famous. It appeared in books, documentaries, movies. It became a staple of paranormal television. Ghost hunters flocked to it. It became one of the most recognized haunted locations in America. But in the process, Sarah herself disappeared. She became a ghost in her own house, less a person than a legend, less a woman than a symbol of madness and mystery. The real Sarah, the one who read in 4 languages, who played piano, who paid her workers well, who donated to hospitals, who loved daisies and stained glass and California sunlight, that Sarah got erased. What was left was the haunted heiress, the crazy widow, the woman who built a house for ghosts. And that's the story we still tell. But here's the twist. The house is still standing, despite earthquakes, 1906, 1989, and countless smaller ones. The house is still there. Damaged? Yes. Reinforced? Yes. Restored in places. But standing. The construction wasn't professional. There were no blueprints. The design made no structural sense. It should have collapsed decades ago, but it didn't. It's still there. Sprawling, strange, beautiful, baffling. Still a maze. Still a mystery. Still Sarah's. And maybe that's the best answer we'll get. Not an explanation. Not a confession. Just the house itself, standing stubbornly against time, earthquakes, and a world that wanted it to make sense. Sarah built something that outlasted her. Something that outlasted the cursed story, the ghost hunters, the tourists, the skeptics. Something that's still here, more than a century later, asking us to look closer. What do you see when you look at the Winchester house? A haunted mansion? A monument to madness? A rich woman's folly? Or do you see a woman who lost everything, inherited a fortune built on violence, and spent 40 years turning it into something else? Something strange, yes, but also something hers? I know what I see, but you'll have to decide for yourself. There's one more thing we need to talk about, the rifle. Because you can't tell the story of Sarah Winchester without talking about the Winchester repeating rifle. It's the foundation of everything. The money, the guilt, the legend, the question of whether Sarah was haunted or just trying to live with an inheritance she never asked for. So let's talk about what the rifle actually did. The Winchester Model 1873 was called the gun that won the West. It was a lever-action, repeating rifle, fast, accurate, reliable. It could fire 15 rounds without reloading. It was affordable. It was everywhere. Cowboys used it. Lawmen used it. Outlaws used it. Soldiers, settlers, ranchers, trappers. Everyone had one. It became the symbol of the American frontier. But the frontier wasn't empty. And winning, it meant something very specific. It meant the systematic displacement and slaughter of indigenous peoples. It meant the Apache, the Sioux, the Comanche, the Cheyenne, the Nez Perce, and dozens of other nations fighting for their land, their lives, their survival, and losing in part because the U.S. Army and white settlers had Winchester rifles. It meant wars over stolen land in Mexico and Central America. It meant range wars between cattlemen and homesteaders, fought with Winchester bullets. It meant lynchings and massacres and violence that we've sanitized into the Wild West. The Winchester rifle didn't cause all of this, but it enabled it. It made it efficient. It made it possible to kill more people faster from farther away. And the Winchester family made millions from it. Oliver Winchester, Sarah's father-in-law, didn't invent the rifle. He bought the patent, improved the design, and built a company. He was a businessman, not a gunslinger. He saw a market and he filled it. That's capitalism. But capitalism doesn't erase the consequences. The rifles went out. The money came in. And the bodies piled up. Did Oliver think about that? Did William, Sarah's husband? Did they see the reports from the frontier, the massacres, the broken treaties, the children killed in their villages, and feel anything? Or did they just see sales figures? We don't know. They didn't write about it. Men like that rarely did. But Sarah had 40 years to think about it. 40 years alone with a fortune built on those rifles. 40 years to read, to reflect, to reckon with where her money came from. Did she feel guilty? Did she feel responsible? Did she see her daughter's death, her husband's death, as punishment? Or did she just see them as tragedies, and the fortune as something she had to live with? The curse story says she was told she was haunted by the victims of Winchester rifles, that every person killed by those guns was demanding vengeance, that she had to build to appease them. Even if that story is fiction, the feeling behind it is real. Because how do you live with that? How do you spend money that came from violence? How do you sleep in a mansion built on bones? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most American fortunes are built on violence. Railroad fortunes were built on stolen indigenous land, and Chinese laborers worked to death. Oil fortunes were built on environmental destruction and labor exploitation. Cotton fortunes were built on slavery. Tech fortunes are built on exploited factory workers in other countries and the slow erosion of privacy and democracy. This is not ancient history. This is the foundation of American wealth. And most of us inherit some version of it, even if it's not millions of dollars. Most of us benefit in some way from systems of violence and exploitation that we didn't create but still participate in. So what do you do with that? Do you refuse the money? Do you give it all away? Do you try to do good with it and hope that balances the scales? Do you just ignore it and live your life? Sarah Winchester spent 40 years answering that question in her own way. She kept the money. She didn't martyr herself or give it all to charity. But she also didn't hoard it. She spent it on labor, on beauty, on creation. She employed men. She built something. She gave. Was that enough? Is it ever enough? I don't know. But I think Sarah was asking that question every single day. And I think the house is her answer, imperfect, incomplete, but honest. Let's talk about the modern Winchester Company, because it's still around. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company was eventually sold, merged, bought by other corporations. The brand still exists. You can still buy Winchester rifles and ammunition today. and people still die from them. Every year. In America, in wars abroad, in accidents, in murders, in suicides. The Winchester name is still on bullets that kill people. Sarah's been dead for over 100 years. The company has changed hands a dozen times. But the legacy continues. Does that implicate her? Does it matter that she's been dead for a century? Does it matter that she never made the rifles herself, only inherited the money? These are hard questions. And the easy answer, she's not responsible, doesn't feel quite right. Because she did benefit. She lived off that money. She built her house with it. But the other easy answer, she's just as guilty as the people pulling the triggers, also doesn't feel right. Because she didn't choose where the money came from. She just inherited it, like so many of us inherit systems we didn't build but still live inside. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe Sarah Winchester was neither innocent nor guilty, but something more complicated. Someone trying to live with an inheritance she couldn't escape and couldn't undo. And maybe the house, the endless, inexplicable, generous, strange house, was her attempt to do something with that inheritance other than just enjoy it. Here's the thing I keep thinking about. Sarah Winchester could have done nothing. She could have stayed in New Haven, lived quietly, spent her money on herself, and died wealthy and respectable. She could have remarried and let her new husband handle everything. She could have given all the money to the church and lived like a nun. But she didn't. She went west, toward the frontier her family's rifles had won. And she built. She built something no one asked for, no one understood, and no one could control. She employed men for 40 years. She paid them well. She gave to hospitals and orphans. She created something that's still standing, still confusing, still asking questions more than a century later. Is that redemption? No. You can't redeem genocide with a weird house and good wages. But is it something? Yes. It's an attempt. It's an effort. It's a woman with a blood fortune trying to turn it into labor, life, beauty, purpose. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Recognize where we came from, what we've inherited, who paid for it, and then try to do something with it other than just consume it. Sarah Winchester didn't solve the moral problem of her fortune, but she didn't ignore it either. She lived with it, wrestled with it, built around it for 40 years. And in the end, she left us a house that still asks the question, what do you do with the things you inherit that you never chose and can't undo? Let's talk about ghosts one more time. Not the literal ghosts, the spirits supposedly haunting the house, but the metaphorical ones. The ghosts we all carry. Because in a way, we're all haunted. By history. By choices we didn't make. By systems we were born into. By the people who came before us and the consequences of their actions that we still live with. Sarah Winchester was haunted by the dead, maybe literally, if you believe the stories, but definitely metaphorically. She was haunted by her daughter, who died at 6 weeks, by her husband, who died at 43, by the thousands of people killed by Winchester rifles, whether she thought about them or not. And she built a house that's a perfect metaphor for that haunting, a maze with no exit, a structure that never ends, a project that consumed her entire life. Is that so different from the rest of us? We inherit the past. We inherit the violence, the exploitation, the stolen land, the broken treaties, the wealth built on suffering. We didn't choose it, but it's ours now, and we have to do something with it. We can ignore it. We can pretend it doesn't matter, that it's ancient history, that we're not responsible. Or we can build. We can take what we've inherited, the privilege, the wealth, the access, the systems, and try to turn it into something else, something better, something that acknowledges the harm and tries, however imperfectly, to create something different. That's what Sarah did. And maybe that's why the house still resonates. Because it's not just a haunted mansion. It's a monument to the question, how do you live with what you've inherited? Here's the other thing. Sarah never finished. The house was never done. There was no final plan, no completion date, no moment when she stepped back and said, okay, it's perfect now. She just kept building, and building, and building, until she died, and the hammer stopped, and the house was left unfinished. And maybe that's the point. Maybe there is no finishing. Maybe when you're trying to reckon with violence, with history, with inheritance, with grief, you don't get to finish. You just keep going. You keep trying. You keep building, even if it's strange, even if no one understands, even if you never get to a place where it's enough. You just do the work. Every day. For as long as you're alive. And then you die. And someone else has to decide what to do with what you left behind. Let's talk about what we've done with what Sarah left behind. We turned her into a ghost. We turned her house into a haunted attraction. We sold tickets, told scary stories, filmed paranormal TV shows. We made her a legend, a mystery, a cautionary tale. And in doing that, we erased her. We erased the woman who read in 4 languages, who played piano beautifully, who loved stained glass and daisies and California light, who paid her workers above average wages and gave them pensions, who donated to hospitals and orphans, who spent 40 years building something inexplicable because she wanted to, because she could, because it was hers. We turned her into the crazy widow, the haunted heiress, the woman who talked to ghosts. Why? Because it's easier. Because a ghost story is simple. Because she was crazy is an explanation that lets us stop thinking. But what if she wasn't crazy? What if she was just a woman trying to make sense of a life that didn't fit any available script? What if the house is exactly what it looks like? A 40-year project by someone with grief, money, time, and no interest in explaining herself to a world that wouldn't understand anyway. What if the mystery isn't the house, but us? Our need to turn every woman who doesn't perform normalcy into a ghost. Here's the thing. Sarah Winchester doesn't need our approval. She doesn't need us to understand her. She's been dead for over 100 years. The house is still standing. She won. But we could stop calling her crazy. We could stop selling her as a ghost story. We could start telling the truth. That she was a woman with a complicated inheritance who spent 40 years doing something strange, generous, and entirely her own. That she employed men when others wouldn't. That she paid well. That she gave to charity. That she built something beautiful and baffling and still standing. That she didn't ask for the fortune. That she didn't make the rifles. But that she also didn't ignore where the money came from. She took it and turned it into labor, into rooms, into wages, into hospitals, into orchards, into light. Was it enough? Maybe not. Is it ever enough? But it was something. And that something deserves more than a ghost story. Let me tell you what I think the Winchester House really is. It's a monument to grief that doesn't end. To loss that you carry forever. To the daughter who died at 6 weeks. And the husband who died at 43, and the silence that followed. It's a monument to wealth that comes with weight, to money built on violence, to the question of what you do with a fortune you didn't ask for and can't give back. It's a monument to work as purpose, to the idea that you can build your way through grief, that you can employ men and pay them well and give them something stable in an unstable world. It's a monument to privacy, to a woman who said, "I don't owe you an explanation," who built what she wanted and didn't care if it made sense to anyone else. It's a monument to refusal, to refusing to remarry, to refusing to perform widowhood correctly, to refusing to disappear, to refusing to be anything other than exactly what she was. And it's a monument to the fact that we will always haunt the women we don't understand, that will turn them into ghosts, into mysteries, into legends, because we can't accept that they might just be people doing what they want. Sarah Winchester built a house. For 40 years, she built. And when she died, the house remained strange, unfinished, inexplicable. And we called it haunted, because we couldn't imagine that a woman might just be building for herself. So here's my question for you. What are you building? Not literally, not necessarily a house. But what are you doing with what you've inherited? The privilege, the money, the systems, the history. Are you ignoring it? Are you pretending it doesn't matter? Or are you trying to turn it into something else? Something better. Something that acknowledges the harm and tries to create something different. Are you employing people? Paying them fairly? Giving to those who need it? Creating beauty? Building something strange and imperfect and entirely your own? Because that's what Sarah did. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Winchester house. Not that you can build your way out of guilt. Not that construction will keep you alive. Not that ghosts will haunt you if you stop. But that you can build. You can take what you've inherited, good, bad, bloody, complicated, and you can do something with it. Something generous. Something strange. Something that outlasts you. You won't finish. You won't solve it. You won't erase the past. But you can build. And maybe that's enough. There's a specific moment I keep thinking about. It's not dramatic. It's not a seance or a secret passage or a staircase to nowhere. It's just a small, quiet detail that says everything. After Sarah died and the house was being inventoried, they found something in one of the many storage rooms. Hundreds of doorknobs. Ornate, expensive, beautiful doorknobs. Brass, crystal, silver. Enough for dozens of houses. Most of them still wrapped, never used. Why did she have so many doorknobs? The easy answer. She was a hoarder. A crazy old woman stockpiling things for no reason. But here's another answer. She liked doorknobs. She thought they were beautiful. And she had the money to buy beautiful things, so she did. And maybe she planned to use them someday, or maybe she just liked having them, looking at them, knowing they were there. Is that madness? Or is that just being rich and eccentric and doing what you want? If a man collected hundreds of rare books he never read, we'd call him a collector, a connoisseur. But when a woman collects doorknobs, we call it evidence of insanity. That's the double standard. That's the story we tell ourselves to make sense of a woman who didn't behave the way we expected. Here's what else they found. Crates of unused tiles. Stacks of lumber. Rolls of wallpaper. Windows still in their frames, never installed. Furniture still wrapped, never unwrapped. Enough building materials to construct several more houses. Sarah died with the construction unfinished, not because she ran out of money, but because she ran out of time. The house was never meant to be done. It was meant to be continuous, a project that lasted as long as she did. And when she died, the project stopped. The materials were sold, scrapped, or trashed. The construction site was cleaned up. The house was sealed, opened to tourists, and turned into a museum of its own strangeness. But imagine, if Sarah had lived another 10 years, another 20, what would the house have become? More rooms? More stairs? More light? We'll never know. The house is frozen in 1922, unfinished, mid-thought, a sentence that stops in the middle. And maybe that's the most honest thing about it. Because life doesn't finish either. You don't get to complete yourself, resolve your grief, fix your past. You just live and build and try, and then you die, and someone else decides what your life meant. Let's talk about the tours. Today, if you visit the Winchester Mystery House, you can take several different kinds of tours. There's the standard mansion tour, an hour or so walking through rooms, hearing about the staircases to nowhere and the seance room and the curse. There's a behind-the-scenes tour that shows you the areas not usually open to the public. There's a flashlight tour at night for ghost hunters. There's even a Friday the 13th special tour, because of course there is. The guides tell the legend. They emphasize the mystery. They point out the strange architectural features and speculate about Sarah's madness. They talk about the spirits, the curse, the medium in Boston. Some guides are more respectful, more nuanced. They mention Sarah's charity, her treatment of workers, the possibility that the house was just an eccentric project by a woman who liked building. But even then, the structure of the tour pushes you toward the ghost story. Because that's what people came for. That's what sells tickets. And look, I get it. The house is strange. It is mysterious. And ghost stories are fun. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the paranormal angle, with getting a little thrill from walking through a dark hallway and imagining spirits in the shadows. But at some point we have to ask, are we honoring Sarah Winchester's legacy, or are we exploiting it? Are we trying to understand her, or are we just using her house as a haunted attraction? Here's the thing, the house belongs to all of us now. Sarah's dead. She can't control what we do with it. And in a way, that's fitting, because she built it without explaining herself, and now we get to interpret it however we want. But I think we owe her more than a ghost story. We owe her the truth, that she was smart, competent, generous, and weird. That she did something no one else has ever done, built a house for 40 years with no plan, employed men well, gave to charity, and lived entirely on her own terms. We owe her the acknowledgement that she was grappling with something real: grief, inheritance, violence, money, purpose. We owe her the recognition that the house is hers, her vision, her creation, her answer to a question we still don't know how to ask. And we owe her the respect of not reducing her to a crazy widow who thought ghosts were telling her where to put doors. Let me tell you my favorite part of the house. It's not the seance room or the staircase to nowhere. It's not the grand ballroom or the hidden passages. It's the windows. There are 10,000 windows in the Winchester house. 10,000 ways to let in light. Some of them are stained glass, Tiffany, custom-made, beautiful. Some of them are plain. Some face outside. Some face inside, looking into other rooms or shafts. Some are layered behind other windows, so light passes through twice, 3 times, filtered and softened. Sarah loved light. She loved how it moved through space, how it changed the feeling of a room, how it could be controlled and shaped and played with. And so she built a house that's full of light. Even the interior hallways, even the deep center of the maze, there are windows. There's always light. To me, that says something. That says she wasn't trying to build a tomb or a prison or a fortress against the world. She was trying to build something beautiful, something filled with light. A woman haunted by grief, by death, by violence. And she built a house full of light. That's not madness. That's hope. Here's what I think happened. Sarah Winchester lost everyone she loved. She inherited a fortune built on violence. She was alone, rich, and had no script for what a woman in her position should do. So she went west. She bought a house. And she started building. At first, maybe it was just something to do. A project. A way to fill the days. But it became more. It became purpose. It became creation. It became her answer to the question, what do you do with a life that doesn't fit any available mold? She employed men. She paid them well. She gave to charity. She built something strange and beautiful and inexplicable. She didn't explain herself because she didn't owe anyone an explanation. She didn't perform grief correctly because there is no correct way to grieve. She didn't remarry because she didn't want to. She didn't stop building because she didn't want to stop. And when she died, the world looked at what she left behind and said, this is madness. This is a haunted house. This woman was crazy. Because we couldn't imagine that a woman might just be doing exactly what she wanted, for reasons entirely her own. Here's the last thing I want to say. The Winchester Mystery House is still standing. After 130 years, 2 major earthquakes, and countless smaller ones. After decades of tourists tramping through. After restorations and renovations and repairs. It's still there. Sarah built something that lasted. Something strange, yes. Something unfinished, yes. But something real. And that matters. Because most of us won't leave anything behind. Most of us won't build monuments. We'll live and work and try and die and be forgotten. But Sarah Winchester built a house that's still asking questions. Still making people think. Still standing. And maybe that's the best answer to grief, to inheritance, to violence, to the weight of what we carry. You build something. Something imperfect. Something that doesn't make sense to anyone but you. Something that lasts. Sarah Winchester was not crazy. She was not haunted. Or, if she was haunted by things we're all haunted by. Loss, guilt, history, the weight of what came before. She was just a woman with a fortune and 40 years and a decision to do something with both. She built. And what she built is still here. Still strange. Still beautiful. Still hers. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. Before we finish, I want to take you somewhere specific. Not a room in the house, not a staircase or a hallway, but a place and time. It's 1918. Sarah Winchester is 79 years old. The First World War is ending. The Spanish flu is sweeping the globe. The world is in chaos, millions dead, economies shattered, the old empires collapsing. And in San Jose, in her strange, sprawling house, Sarah is still building. The war means nothing to her construction schedule. The flu means nothing. The hammers keep going. The workers keep coming. The house keeps growing. Why? Why, at 79, with the world falling apart, would you keep building a house that makes no sense, that no one will ever fully understand, that will never be finished? Because it's what she does. It's who she is. It's the only answer she has to the question of how to live with everything she's been given and everything she's lost. The house is her life. And as long as she's building, she's alive. For years later, in September 1922, she'll go to bed and not wake up. The construction will stop that day. The workers will pack up their tools and leave. The house will fall silent for the first time in 38 years. But in 1918, she doesn't know that. She just knows she has today, and tomorrow, and the day after. And she's going to keep building. There's something almost defiant about that. Something stubborn. Something that says, I'm here. I'm still here. And I'm not done yet. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. Because Sarah Winchester left behind more than just a house. She left behind a model for how to treat workers. In an era of exploitation, she paid well, on time, and kept people employed through economic collapse. That's a legacy. She left behind a model for how to use wealth. She didn't hoard it. She didn't just spend it on herself. She built, she employed, she gave. That's a legacy. She left behind a model for how to be a woman who doesn't fit the script. She didn't remarry. She didn't disappear. She didn't apologize. She just lived. That's a legacy. And she left behind a question that we still haven't answered. What do you do with an inheritance you didn't choose and can't undo? That question is still relevant. More relevant than ever, maybe. Because all of us inherit something. All of us benefit from systems built on violence, exploitation, stolen land. All of us carry the weight of history. And the easy answers don't work. You can't just give it all away and pretend you're clean. You can't just ignore it and pretend it doesn't matter. You can't just feel guilty and do nothing. So what do? Sarah's answer was, you build, you create, you employ, you give. You do something imperfect and strange and entirely your own. You spend your life trying, even if you never finish, even if no one understands. Is that the right answer? I don't know, but it's an answer. And it's better than doing nothing. Here's something most people don't know. Sarah Winchester's house wasn't the only thing she built. In 1908, she funded the construction of a tuberculosis hospital in San Jose, the disease that killed her husband. She didn't put her name on it. She didn't seek recognition. She just gave the money, and the hospital was built. How many lives did that save? How many people with tuberculosis, poor people, working people, people who couldn't afford care, got treatment because Sarah Winchester paid for a hospital? We don't know the exact number, but it's not zero, and it's not nothing. She also gave to orphanages. After the 1906 earthquake, she donated thousands to relief funds. She funded disaster recovery. She supported hospitals and schools. None of this is part of the legend. None of this is in the ghost tours, because it doesn't fit the story of the crazy, haunted widow. But it's real. It's documented. It's part of who she was. And it matters. Because the story we tell about Sarah Winchester shapes how we think about women, about wealth, about grief, about responsibility. If we only tell the ghost story, we're saying a woman who doesn't explain herself is crazy. A woman with money who doesn't remarry is tragic. A woman building something strange must be haunted. But if we tell the whole story, the workers, the charity, the hospital, the generosity, we're saying a woman can be complicated. A woman can be grieving and competent. A woman can use her wealth in ways that are imperfect but meaningful. Which story do we want to tell? Let's talk about the name, the Winchester Mystery House. That name was chosen by the people who turned it into a tourist attraction. Sarah never called it that. To her, it was just her house, her home. But Mystery House sells tickets. It promises ghosts secrets, puzzles to solve. It turns the house into a riddle, and Sarah into a madwoman who left clues. Except there are no clues. There's no code to crack. There's no secret message hidden in the architecture. It's just a house that a woman built for 40 years because she wanted to, because she could, because it gave her purpose. The only mystery is the one we created. The mystery of why we can't accept that a woman might do something for her own reasons and never explain. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a man, let's call him Samuel Winchester, who inherited a fortune at 42. He moved west, bought land, and spent 40 years building a massive, sprawling, experimental estate. He employed dozens of workers, paid them above-average wages, kept them on through recessions. He gave to charity. He lived alone, rarely gave interviews, and built something completely unique, strange, beautiful, full of architectural experiments and oddities. When he died at 83, people would say, "What a visionary. What an eccentric genius. What a fascinating man." They'd write biographies praising his independence, his creativity, his boldness. They'd call the house a masterpiece of experimental architecture. They'd say he was ahead of his time. But Sarah Winchester did exactly that. And we call her crazy. Why? Because she was a woman. That's it. That's the only difference. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Sarah Winchester was not a ghost story. She was a person. Complicated, grieving, wealthy, stubborn, generous, private, and strange. She inherited a fortune built on violence. She didn't choose it. She couldn't undo it. But she did something with it. She built. She employed. She gave. She created. Was it enough? Was it redemption? I don't know. Maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the question is, did she try? Did she spend her life doing something other than just consuming her wealth? Did she create something that mattered, even if it's imperfect? And the answer is yes, she did. The Winchester house is still standing. The workers she employed had food on their tables for decades. The hospital she funded saved lives. The charity she gave made a difference. That's not madness. That's not a curse. That's just a woman doing what she could with what she had. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Let me tell you one last story. It's small. It almost got lost in the archives. But I think it says everything. In 1920, 2 years before Sarah died, one of her longtime workers, a carpenter named John Hansen, who'd been with her for over 20 years, got sick. Seriously sick. He couldn't work anymore. Sarah didn't fire him. She didn't cut him off. She kept paying him full wages for 2 years until she died. And when she died and her estate was settled, Hansen was given a pension. She'd left instructions in her will. She'd made sure he was taken care of. This wasn't a publicity stunt. No newspapers covered it. No one knew except Hansen and Sarah's estate lawyer. It was just a private act of decency, taking care of someone who'd worked for you, even when they couldn't work anymore. That's who Sarah Winchester was. Not a ghost-obsessed madwoman. Not a cursed heiress. Just a woman who took care of her people. And we turned her into a ghost story. Here's the thing about hauntings. We choose what haunts us. We could remember Sarah Winchester as a woman who employed men well, who gave to charity, who built something strange and beautiful. But we choose to remember her as crazy, as haunted, as a woman building a maze to confuse ghosts. Why? Because it's easier. Because it's more dramatic. Because it lets us avoid the harder questions about wealth, violence, inheritance, and what we do with the fortunes built on blood. If Sarah's just a ghost story, we don't have to think about the Winchester rifle. We don't have to think about the indigenous people killed in the name of westward expansion. We don't have to think about where American wealth comes from and what it costs. We can just walk through a spooky house, take some pictures, and go home. But if Sarah's a person, if the house is an attempt to grapple with inheritance, grief, purpose, and responsibility, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we building? What are we inheriting? And what are we doing with it? And that's harder. That requires honesty. That requires action. So we choose the ghost story. Because ghosts are easier than history. But here's what I think. Sarah Winchester deserves better. She deserves to be remembered as a full person, not a saint, not a villain, but someone complex and human who tried to do something meaningful with a complicated inheritance. She deserves to have her generosity acknowledged, her treatment of workers, her charity, her hospitals, her decades of employment during economic collapse. She deserves to have her privacy respected. The fact that she didn't explain herself doesn't mean she was crazy. It means she didn't owe the world an explanation. She deserves to have her creativity celebrated. She built something no one had ever built before, something strange, yes, but also beautiful, full of light, full of craftsmanship. And she deserves to have her question taken seriously. What do you do with wealth built on violence? Because that's still our question. That's America's question. That's the question every person with privilege and inheritance has to answer. And Sarah spent 40 years answering it the only way she knew how, by building, by employing, by giving, by creating. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the violence of the Winchester rifle. It didn't undo the deaths. But it was something. And that something deserves respect, not mockery. Truth, not legend. Complexity, not a ghost story. So here we are, at the end of Sarah Winchester's story. At the end of this video, the house is still standing in San Jose. You can visit it. You can walk the halls, climb the staircases to nowhere, peek through the windows that face other windows. You can take a ghost tour at midnight if you want. You can listen to the guides tell you about the curse and the seance room. Or you can do something different. You can walk through and think about the woman who built it. Think about her grief. Think about her wealth. Think about the 40 years she spent building, employing, giving, creating. Think about what it means to inherit something you didn't choose. Think about what you do with it. Think about the workers who had steady jobs for decades because Sarah Winchester kept building. Think about the hospitals she funded. Think about the charity she gave. Think about the fact that she was a woman doing all of this in an era when women weren't supposed to do anything at all without a man's permission. Think about the fact that she was strange and private and generous and complicated and human. And then think about your own life, your own inheritance, your own privilege, your own ghosts. What are you building? What are you doing with what you've been given? Sarah Winchester died in her sleep at 83. The construction stopped. The house fell silent. But the questions didn't stop. The questions are still here, still waiting for us to answer them. She built a house full of light, a house that employed men, a house that's still standing after 130 years. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't a saint. She wasn't a villain. She was just a woman trying to do something with what she'd been given. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Winchester house. Not the ghost story, not the legend, but the simple human truth. We all inherit things we didn't choose. We all carry weight we didn't ask for. We all have to decide what to do with it. And Sarah Winchester decided to build. Imperfect, strange, generous, inexplicable. But she built. And the house is still here, still asking questions, still full of light. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us can hope to leave behind. Something real, something lasting. Something that asks the people who come after us to think, to question, to try. Sarah Winchester built a mystery house. But the real mystery isn't the house. It's us. It's what we'll do next. It's what we'll build with our own inheritances, our own grief, our own 40 years. The hammers stopped in 1922. But the question is still here. What will you build?